Wow, welcome this morning, this beautiful day. How you doing? Online, how are you doing? Awesome, look at that. They're fired up too. So glad that you're here. We're smack dab in the middle of this series we're calling Here and There. We're examining a little bit about who we want to be as a church. Remember, when we say church, we talk people. We're not talking facility. We're talking about a people who embrace multiplication, a people who embrace generosity or worship, and a people who embrace community. That's what we're doing. We're going to dive into generosity this week, but I have this question. Has anybody ever received a gift that was memorable? Yeah? Have you received a memorable gift before? What was that gift? If you can say it out loud, you can say it out loud. A child? Okay. Nobody's going to go above that now. Like, somebody said child, and they're like, I was going to say my watch, but like, no. Anything else that was memorable? Go ahead. Nothing else. Just children. Grandchildren. Okay, now we one-upped it. Children, grandchildren. Great-grandchildren. Oh, my goodness. Anything else other than people that you've received that has been memorable? Jets tickets. I don't know why you'd want to see the Jets, but... Now, here's the thing. Whether we know it or not, gift giving or generosity, or, dare I say, even worship, is something that's baked into the ethos of our culture as human beings. Regardless of where we live in the world, this happens. I have had the privilege of being able to visit different countries throughout the world on missions trips, and sometimes in those environments, you are offered something by a host family that otherwise they would not give to anybody else. I remember sitting in a home in the middle of a small little community in Brazil, and they would pass around this matcha tea blend that was like a communal cup, and everybody drank it. You'd sit in a circle, and you'd take a sip, and you'd pass it to your neighbor, and then it would come back around to you, and you're like, oh my goodness, I get to take another sip, and keep going, and keep going, and keep. It was like a nightmare if you were a germaphobe. And then you're like, sweet, it's empty. And then they'd fill it up again. And then around and around you'd go. But here's the thing with generosity that's really neat. Sometimes we get something that is actually memorable in nature. It's usually something that we maybe haven't asked for, but it's something that maybe we needed in the moment. And that's pretty interesting and cool. And for me, that memory that I've got being in that small little town in Brazil is heartwarming because I was invited to the table as a member of equal status in that space, even though I didn't know a lick of Portuguese. I was invited to participate in something that I will never do again, but it sticks with me. We've all received the gift of some kind, whether it's children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Maybe somebody paid a bill for us that we were unexpectedly recipients of. And we sit there when that gift of generosity surfaces, and we're like, now what do we do with it? What we're going to do over these next few moments is we're going to dig into the biblical framework of generosity. And when I mean generosity, I'm talking about worship as well, which is an extension, a giving of something from one person to another thing. So when we gather together and we worship through song, or we worship through learning, or we worship through conversation, we're giving something to somebody else. In the act of worship through song, we're often giving something to God, our Creator. Comes from us and say, hey, we're going to give back to you this moment, this time, this focus as a sign of love, a sign of respect, a sign of hopefulness of building further communion with one another. So let's talk a little bit about generosity. When the world was first created, did you know that God created it with generosity in mind? He created the land to produce for humankind and all of creation exactly what it needed in order to survive and even thrive. It was called a Garden of Eden. It was perfect. It was amazing. But in that space, you and I, as human beings, our first representatives, Adam and Eve, they did not settle into it fairly well. In fact, they kind of rebuffed what was offered to them in the form of generosity, and they figured that maybe there was something more it's organized in, and it'll make a little bit more sense. Here's what it says in Numbers chapter 18, verses 20 and 21. And the Lord said to Aaron, you priests will receive no allotment of land or share of property among the people of Israel. I am your share and your allotment. As for the tribe of Levi, your relatives, I will compensate them for their service in the tabernacle. Instead of an allotment of land, I will give them the tithes from the entire land of Israel. Okay, let's unpack this a little bit. This framework of a Levitical tithe meant something different than maybe we understand. The word tithe literally means, translated from Hebrew into English, a tenth. So if you were a landowner, you had a responsibility, you were allotted a portion of land, a responsibility to bring once a year a tenth of all that was produced from that land, whether that was crops, whether that was animals, combination of both, and bring it to the tabernacle, which was the epicenter of community for the nation of Israel. It was mobile in nature to begin with. Then it became kind of sedentary in nature in the city of Jerusalem. So regardless of where you were throughout the region known as Israel, you would bring your tithe once a year to this space. And out of that once a year gift, those that were not property owners would benefit from your generosity. It's important for us to understand that we're seeing a shift here where God, the modality of his giving and his generosity, moves from he himself solely to now working through his creation. Working through his created beings to provide for one another. The tribe of Levi was set aside from all the other tribes in order to do, quote unquote, what we commonly use language for today, the Lord's work. Meaning they were set apart from all the other duties and responsibilities. A segment of them were priests that did all the rituals of offerings and sacrifice and worship and stuff like that. If they weren't a priest, they were still set apart. They were ineligible to own property of their own because their responsibility was to care for God's house. Maintenance, making sure everything functioned well, set up and take down when it was mobile, cleaning, all sorts of stuff, it was their responsibility. It's interesting because this is the first real scriptive moment where you see God saying, here's how I want my new reality, my new economy, so to speak, to function. I want to work through people to care for other people. So you had this one tithe that was called the Levitical tithe. In addition to that one tithe, you had two other tithes. The second tithe is known as the Festival Tithe. You can read about this in Deuteronomy chapter 14. It's going to be on screen here in just a moment. Deuteronomy chapter 14, starting in verse 22. This is what God instructs. Again, these same landowners, these same groups of people. He said, you must set aside a tithe of your crops. Remember, 1/10 of all the crops you harvest each year. Bring this tithe to the designated place of worship, the place the Lord your God chooses for his name to be honored, and eat it there in his presence. So basically, God is saying, get together and party in my name. This applies to your tithes of grain, new wine, olive oil, and the firstborn males of your flocks and herds. Doing this will teach you always to fear the Lord your God. Now, when the Lord your God blesses you with a good harvest, the place of worship he chooses for his name to be honored might be too far for you to bring the tithe. If so, you may sell the tithe portion of your crops and herds, put the money in a pouch, and go to the place the Lord your God has chosen. When you arrive, you may use the money to buy any kind of food you want, cattle, sheep, goats, wine, or other alcoholic drink. Then feast there in the presence of the Lord your God and celebrate with your household. And do not neglect the Levites in your town, for they will receive no allotment of land among you. Okay, so the second tithe is known as the Festival Tithe. The Festival Tithe is when the nation of Israel was invited to gather together to celebrate and remember God's provision, God's faithfulness, God's mercy along the way in their story as a nation, as a people. In particular, they were celebrating something called Passover. See, generationally, this group of people have been the ancestors not too far removed from those that endured slavery for a period of time in the nation of Egypt. They were delivered from that space through a series of interventions by God, working through human beings and miracles as well. A leader named Moses, his brother Aaron, who we already talked about in the first Levitical tithe, that's the same Aaron. God spoke to them, allowed them to guide the community in so many different ways. It gets to this point, this festival tithe of celebrating the Passover. The Passover is this moment of remembrance of how during the darkest days of their slavery, the pinnacle, that moment that shaped Pharaoh's mind to allow the Israelites to move into freedom instead of remain in captivity, was all the firstborn children and all the firstborn flock, members of the flock, the animals, stuff like that, were slain. That was the last final straw, the plague that was poured out on the nation of Egypt. And in order to relent from being a victim to what was going to happen in that moment, there was this process that the people of Israel were invited into, where they were to kill an animal, sprinkle its blood or paint its blood on the doorposts of their homes. And as the spirit of death would kind of hover over that space, where the homes that had blood on the doorway, it would just pass over. It wouldn't enter, it wouldn't act out the declaration that God had said about the loss of these firstborn. And so that was a really important moment in the history of their nation, where they remembered that God provided for them even in the darkest moments. As those around them were grieving and mourning the loss of so much, they were provided for. They were spared, they were protected, they were saved. So that'd be one of the festivals that they would gather together to celebrate. And so this festival tithe was another tenth, okay? So remember, the Levitical tithe, once a year, 10%. Festival tithe, once a year, 10%. And if you lived too far from wherever the tabernacle or place of worship was, you were permitted to not just haul it from where you were to where you were going to be. You were permitted to sell it, bring in the goods, bring in the cash flow to that space and use it for the party. So every single year, 20% of whatever was grown and developed on the land, whatever multiplied in terms of the flocks, the animals under your care, 20% of that, right off the top, was offered back in generosity by people to God in one of these two ways. There's a third tithe that showed up every 3 years. It's called the Poor Tithe. Same section of text here in Deuteronomy chapter 14, verses 28 and 29. It says this: at the end of every year, bring the entire tithe of that year's harvest and store it in the nearest town. Give it to the Levites, who will receive no allotment of land among you, as well as to the foreigners living among you, the orphans and the widows in your towns, so they can eat and be satisfied. Then the Lord your God will bless you in all your work. So the poor tithe, this is the framework of what it looked like. Again, every 3 years, an additional tenth. An additional tenth. So that third year, 30% of whatever has come off of your land, your possessions, was offered back to God in order for it to provide for those that didn't have anything, the poor. So the Levites were among that category, but those also named in this text, foreigners. Foreigners were not permitted to own property in the nation of Israel. Orphans, those that didn't belong to parents, they were not yet eligible to own property because of their age. Widows, women weren't at this point in time allowed rights to property. And so every third year, God engineered this idea of radical generosity. Hey, this is what we're going to do. Every 3 years, you're going to take another tenth and make sure that those that don't have anything are provided for another 3 years. So you'd bring it into the nearest town. This part wasn't collected at the tabernacle. This part was the nearest town. You could be Bethlehem, it could be Bethsaida, it could be Capernaum. Wherever you were, your nearest town, you'd bring it into there, a common storehouse, and the Levites in that town would be responsible to administer the gift to those who are in need in the community. So for those of you doing the math, 20% every single year, 30% every third year, it averages out to roughly 23% every single year. Now, I don't know about you, but if somebody asks me for 23% of everything that I have every single year, I'm telling them to go fly a kite. And so it's a tension here because we're like, okay, is this a declaration that God is saying, or is this an invitation to participate in generosity? Whenever I come up against these conundrums in Scripture, I look to the life of Jesus and I go, what did Jesus have to say about this tension and this issue that I'm wrestling with? Because Jesus, being fully God and fully human, represents God's interests in the world today. So why don't we do that? Let's look at what Jesus said. Jesus says a lot of different things about money. In fact, he tells a collection of stories called parables, 40 of them. 11 of them focus on possessions or money in some framework. One of my favorites is what I'm going to read here in Matthew chapter 22, verses 15 through 22. Then the Pharisees met together to plot how to trap Jesus into saying something for which he could be arrested. Interesting that people are plotting already to take the life of Jesus, and one of the methods that we're going to discover that they go after is money. They sent some of their disciples, their followers. These Pharisees also had followers, people that were following them called disciples, along with supporters of Herod to meet with them. Herod was the person in charge representing the Roman interests in the region at the time. Teacher, they said, we know how honest you are. You teach the way of God truthfully. You are impartial and don't play favorites. Now tell us what you think about this. Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Pause there for just a moment. This group of mercenaries, and yes, I'm using that term correctly, are sent into this conversation to trap Jesus in order to provide evidence for their personal motivation to remove him, take his life out of their community. They're sent in here with a purpose. Here's what Jesus replies in verse 18. But Jesus knew their evil motives. You hypocrites, he said, why are you trying to trap me? Here, show me the coin used for the tax. When they handed him a Roman coin, he asked, whose picture and title are stamped on it? Caesar's, they replied. Well then, he said, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and give to God what belongs to God. His reply amazed them, and they went away. It's interesting that Jesus talks about money in this fashion. The tithe that he referred to, that we talked about historically in the Old Testament, is all about property. It's all about animals. It's all about resources, time even. And then in the New Testament here, there's this conversation about money. And I love what Jesus says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's. It's a very insightful statement because if you're a follower of Jesus, you understand one groundbreaking thing. Everything that we have, whether we like it or not, is a gift that we've been given by our Creator. In other words, everything that we have belongs to Him. So the invitation that Jesus is saying here is well and far beyond a mathematical framework of giving. What He's inviting us to consider is who owns what we are stewards of. It's fascinating. Who owns what we are stewards of? We've got a legal system here in Canada, and maybe we've got titles and deeds for property and land and homes or structures that we possess, and legally in our system, humanly speaking, we're the owner of that space. But when our lives belong to Jesus, what we're learning here from this text is everything that falls under that banner of what we think is ownership of ours actually belongs to him. I said it to my kids the other day like this. I said, you know what? You are having the gift of sleeping in a bed that belongs to me. I bought it. I paid for it. I gifted it to you to steward it, to use it, to hopefully help you sleep, which some of them still need to learn. But it's actually not yours. It belongs to somebody else. Now, some of you in this room are going like, well, that sounds like terrible parenting. Vindictive and mean, always challenging your kids. You're upsetting their security. What I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to help them understand is whatever we have, whatever's placed into our hands, is actually ultimately not ours. If we claim to follow Jesus, then everything that he gives to us generously, directly from himself, indirectly through other people, through the land that we occupy, through creation itself, all of it is actually ultimately his. And we're invited into the opportunity to steward whatever he gives to us wisely. I think if we could understand that more and more and more, then I think our relationship with our things, our possessions, and even our time would become less volatile. Have you ever encountered a moment or a situation where somebody was violating the use of your time? Yeah? You don't want to put your hand up? That's cool. Some of you might be thinking, this is violating the usage of my time right now. It's frustrating in that moment. You're like, I don't have time for this. Maybe that's a phrase that came to your mind. I don't have time for this. And yet it's happening. And whether you like it or not, you have to deal with whatever's in front of you. Could be a mess that somebody made unintentionally or intentionally. Could be a conversation that you've been avoiding, but you're actually having right now at the most inconvenient time ever. It could be that you're stuck in traffic because they're doing paving, because why not? Let's pave right now in the middle of the day when everybody's trying to go to work or come home. Or maybe they'll just shut down a bridge for 8 months and say, sorry, find some other way. Hypothetically, these things happen. It's interesting when you watch your emotional response when you encounter situations like that. We're frustrated because we think somebody's taking something from us. In all honesty, I think that's what it is. You're stealing my time. You're stealing my money. Property taxes go up. We get frustrated. City council, come on, can't you balance a budget without more of my money? Politicians talk about a new revenue stream, and we're like, great, who's paying for it? We are. It frustrates us. And it's a tension that we have to talk about and we have to manage, because the way of Jesus is the way of generosity. In fact, the team at the Bible Project says it like this. There's a quote that's going to go up on screen here in just a moment. Bold generosity can subvert the power games of our world. Bold generosity can subvert the power games in our world. The whole system that was designed in the nation of Israel around generosity was all about upside down thinking regarding power structures. So that if you were born into the tribe of Levi, you did not have that choice. You were born into it. You were not permitted to own land. You were not permitted to have your own things. You would still not be left without something, because the community at large would be caring for you through the practice of generosity. One of the most frustrating things for me as a pastor after 20 plus years is knowing that the provision that I'm able to give and provide for my family is directly related to whether or not people are going to choose to be generous with what they've earned. That's hard. As a father, that's hard. When my kid's like, hey, we need this, we need this, we need this, you're like, nope, maybe, definitely not. It's a hard, sobering reality because everything in our humanity, in our human nature for ourselves, we want to be able to do it for ourselves. If you've ever tried to teach a young kid a new skill, they'll get to a point where they say this, I want to do it myself. The worst thing that can ever happen is them recognizing that they can do it themselves. Because then it takes way more time, it's way more messy, it's way more chaotic, and you can't go where you need to go. I think we fear generosity because it's something that we ultimately don't have control over. No matter what kind of structure we create internally and externally, we don't have control. We are invited to acquiesce our control, release control to the one who created it all. So if this sums up what Jesus said, how did the early church continue to practice this? Let's take a look at another set of verses from the book of Corinthians, chapter 16, verses 1 through 4. This is Paul writing to the Corinthian church. He talks about this whole concept of tithing, basically, and is paraphrasing what they would have been accustomed to in the Jewish community, this tithe sequence. Here's what he says about it. He said, now regarding your question about the money being collected for God's people in Jerusalem, you should follow the same procedure I gave to the churches in Galatia. On the first day of each week, you should each put aside a portion of the money you have earned. Don't wait until I get there and then try to collect it all at once. When I come, I will write letters of recommendation for messengers you choose to deliver your gift to Jerusalem. And if it seems appropriate for me to go along, they can travel with me. There's this snapshot that we are given with regards to a question about generosity. See, this group of people in Corinth was madly, passionately following Jesus. They were in love with him, and they were following all of his values and all of his priorities to the best of their ability as they were enabled and empowered by the Holy Spirit. And one of the things that surfaced was this idea of generosity. How do we choose to live generously? How can we embrace bold generosity? How can we express our worship of our Creator through what we give to those who don't have? And Paul gives them some really practical instructions. He says, okay, plan for it. You literally need to, at times, plan to be generous. There's a spontaneous element to generosity that is possible, but more often than not, it's purposed and it's planned. How do we create purposed, planned generosity? Sometimes it means living below our means so that there's margin for possibility. It's hard to be generous when you don't have anything to be generous with because you're living to the max. You're living to the extreme. There's no leftovers. And so the challenge that Paul is reminding this church in Corinth is like, do it a little bit at a time. It made sense in the Old Testament framework of generosity and giving that God talked about. Generosity and tithing followed the season of harvest. Hard to give something from the land if the fruit hasn't developed and been produced yet. And now that we get into the early church following the lens of Jesus and the trajectory of giving and generosity, it's this element of like, no, be planned and purposeful and regular in your offering of this. Believe it or not, I'm actually not just talking about money. I'm actually talking about our lives. Are we planned and purposeful in the way we're choosing to live so that there's something there to give and invest in what God is inviting us into. If our calendar is so full and there's no margin for anything, then that conversation that your neighbor's wanting to have with you, not about whose fence is on whose side of the property or not, but about real deep, meaningful, life-based things, is improbable because you're rushing from one space to the next and you don't slow down long enough to create the space to engage with what's right in front of you. I'm talking about our time. I'm talking about, yes, our treasure, but I'm also talking about the way we choose to live. It needs to be purposeful and intentional, like this Corinthian church, right at the beginning of a week, right at the beginning of something new, right at a new season. Can we set aside a chunk of that bandwidth in our lives and say to God, okay, what do you want to do with it? 5 years ago, we had a dream as a church. We dreamed of becoming a group of people that would live with a 70-30 mindset. And a 70-30 mindset meant this. We would function as a community, gathered and scattered, with whatever resources came our way, we would retain 70% of those and use it for other things like utilities, staffing, facility cost, occupancy, insurance, you name it, all those kinds of things. And then what we would do is 30% we'd invest somewhere there. So here would be 70, there would be 30. And we thought that would take us 10 years to get there. It took us 2. We started to shift our priorities in what was purposeful, in what mattered. And collectively, as a community, we started to move towards that. As we launched other entities outside of like this hub here, just outside of Lynn that we call the campus of Sea Road, it helped us think externally. It helped us reprioritize where value is in God's kingdom. It was like our poor tithe, so to speak. Taking care of those that couldn't take care of themselves for whatever reason. Foreigner, widow, orphan, you name it. And we moved into that reality, and that's awesome. In fact, last year, it was 69% and 31%. And I have a hope and a dream, and I don't know if it's just a Jason thing, but I would love to see that flip and be a 30-70. Not meaning that we don't have what we need, but that we continue to grow in bold generosity. Why? Because people out there, people in our peer groups, people in our spaces that we work and we recreate, they need to know that Jesus is alive and real, and not just some fancy ideology that you put on a jean jacket through a patch and say, yes, I'm in the club. And if Jesus is real, then bold generosity will definitely challenge and subvert all the power dynamics that exist economically and socially in our world. Because in Jesus' kingdom, every single individual is made in the image of God and they have value. And we can demonstrate that practically by the way we choose to live and the way we choose to give. 2 weeks ago, I challenged you around this idea of getting invested. And I said at some point this month, there'll be a moment where we encourage you to consider what God might be asking of you. And I asked you 2 questions. I said, where is God asking you to heal? And where is God asking you to go? See, the truth is, I don't think we can be a generous people unless we are a healed people. If we've grown up in a household or an environment where things were scarce and we had to fight for stuff and we had to fight for food and we had to fight for affection, I get it. We don't want to participate in generosity because we're fearful that we won't have what we need if we give away any portion of what we have access to. And so maybe we need to heal from that reality of living in a scarcity mindset and flipping it to an abundance mindset. See, abundance mindset doesn't actually mean more stuff. It means stopping the habit of looking at what we don't have and fixating on that. It means looking at what we do have and being grateful for what is already, quote unquote, ours. So when I asked you that 2 weeks ago, I was prayerfully trusting that you were going to ask God, what does that mean for me? What does that look like practically? And then I said, at some point in September, we're going to have an experience where you can put that wondering into practice. Today is that day. In fact, just in a few moments as I close our service, we're going to zip into the gymnasium if you are able. You're going to see a whole number of tables set up, and those of you who picked up a paper catalog, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't yet and you want a digital version, you can get onto your device, croad.ca right now. Right on our homepage, it's a Get Invested catalog. You can click on it and you can look at it and see what it looks like. And it's all of the current spaces that are available for you to consider investing your time, the places where God might be asking you to go, to invest in people who maybe know Him and maybe don't yet know Him in a really tangible way. Why are we doing this? Believe it or not, I do not want to dominate your calendar. But I do want you to walk in the way of Jesus. And I know in my heart, when we say and we recognize that all that we have, including the time that we've been given, our gifts, our skill sets, our experiences, all of it belongs to God. When we recognize that, He will do something crazy. He will multiply our ability to manage our own time so we can invest it wisely. He will multiply our ability to pursue fiscal sustainability because He is good and He provides for what we need. He will right-size the difference between a need and a want. And He'll help us navigate all of those tensions. I think God is asking us to grow in our generosity, to respond to His invitation, not mine or anybody else's. And so I'm going to pray for you, and I'm going to commission you. And then when God is speaking to you and He's saying, hey, join us in the gymnasium, join us in the gymnasium. And if you're not ready for that yet, walk away with Jesus going, why am I not ready to invest what I have for what you might want to do in me and through me? And sit in that space. Journal about it. Pray about it. Ask for wisdom. Ask for insight. Let me pray. Jesus, we're grateful that you invite us into the gift of understanding generosity. And Lord, I know it's hard because, man, it's hard for me. I like my stuff. I like my things. I like my time. I like to be the one that dictates to other people how all of that is used. And yet, you remind us that we are invited to give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to you what is yours. You own it all. Every stitch of it. All of it is a gift from you. Whether we feel like we have plenty or we feel like we have little, it is still yours. And so I pray that mindsets would be broken. Mindsets would be broken here, Jesus. That whatever excuses are constructed by wounds or pains or lies that we've believed would fade away and be replaced by what is actually true. If we are a people who are called by your name, who are invited into your unfolding story here and beyond, Jesus, we know that that's not always going to be easy following you, but we can trust you because you are a God who always delivers on time. Would you help us to be a generous people so those who do not yet know you could discover a piece of who you are. Right now, Lord, I'm asking for ideas to be flooded in hearts and minds. Maybe we've read through the catalog and we're like, oh man, there's nothing that I would love to get involved in. So Jesus, I ask for a new thing. Maybe it's some people who are going to see the ability of hosting people at their home differently. Maybe for the very first time. Maybe it'll be becoming something like a reading buddy at a local school with children that are just learning to read. I don't know what it's going to be, but I know that your creativity is limitless. And so I just pray that you would guide us and lead us into those spaces, and that we would be known more for our yes than we are for our no. Would you bless and protect us? Would you make your face shine upon us, be gracious to us? Would you turn your face towards us and give us your peace? We pray this in your name, Jesus. Amen.